What if one tiny shift in your language could completely change how you show up in life? Today, we explore a simple but powerful reframe that might just change the way you think about everything you do. Welcome back to another episode of Midlife Unfiltered. My name's Margit Cruz.
And my name's Brett, or Clarky, as people call me, and Hacks, Habits and Happiness.
Yes, we're doing another Hacks, Habits and Happiness episode today.
And what are we talking about today?
Well, do you know, I've been reading this book by Ben Crowe and it's called Where the Light Gets In. And it is, for me, it is such a great book. I love it. It mixes some of the things that I love most around personal development as well as stories in the sporting world. So that's kind of really my jam is getting into sport. So the thing that's really struck me in the last couple of weeks as I've read this book is our language around, should, have to, got to, and he has this great little piece of advice around I get to or I got to. And I've been using this myself and really playing with it in the last couple of weeks. Those situations where we feel like we have to do something and we've got to do it. When we change the language to I get to do it, it changes all of the energy that we have around that task or whatever it is that we're doing.
Okay. So I get to.
Yes.
So to me, that's a little Dr. Zeusy.
I get that.
I get to. Okay. Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it because I think it's a really important. So most of my life, particularly in the last 20 years when I've been a coach, I really listen for the language that people use, the way they speak about things in their life, because it gives you so much of a clue. And, we talked about, a few episodes ago, I interviewed Paul Francis about self-awareness. And part of self-awareness is that listening to self. And when you can start to catch your language, what's coming out of your mouth. So, we do a lot of work around thoughts and trying to change our thoughts perhaps before they come. But when we really hear what comes out of our mouth, it's really important because when we say something out loud, first of all, we have to think the thought. And then when we say it, so we hear it in our own voice, but we hear it back through our ears. And so it kind of has this added power for us.
So you're actually saying people think before they speak.
Maybe not for you. No, I think it's true. But I think whether or not that happens like in a microsecond, in a moment or, in a sequence, we don't usually think and then a minute later say something, but it happens really quickly.
So do you think you should almost pause to think just before you speak? Because literally, if you're in a conversation, I'll give you the worst case example. We're in an argument and things are just coming out of your mouth, left, right, and center. And every second word you say, you go, oh, God, I wish I hadn't said that. There's no thinking involved in that.
No, that's true. Well, there is a level of thinking, but it's almost primal when you're in an argument. But I'm not talking about an argument time because,
it's just a situation.
I don't want you to sit there and come back at me and go, I get to be in this argument.
And you say, I've got to be in this argument.
Because I know where that's going. But I just think, linguistically, this definition or this discernment between get to and got to is really powerful if we use it. So I was, we were at a bowls tournament on the weekend. The weekend before I was playing cricket in New Zealand and all of those times, and don't get me wrong, because I wanted to be at all of those. So it was really fun. But even when it was fun, me being able to say, I get to do this, allowed me to take the pressure off myself around the expectations of any outcome.
So you're saying we should reframe something from I've got to I get to.
Yeah, well, and I think it's really powerful because you can use it. You can use it when you've got to do things you don't really want to do, but you can also use it to take that pressure off in those cases, particularly, in my examples, it's around sport at the moment, but when we put pressure on ourselves around an expectation or an outcome of what we should do, we need to take things back to what we can control. And one of the things we can control is our attitude towards what we're doing. So let's just start with, for example, I've got a particular task to do in my work or in my business, and I really don't like doing it. When we say I've got to do this, there's this resistance, this form of resistance. And I love bringing things back to energy, and we can feel it when we say I've got to. I feel that energy, that sort of resistance, that not wanting to sort of really step into it. When I say I get to do this, it reminds me of how lucky I am to exist in a world where I have some choices, where perhaps I'm running my own business, where I have a job, where, we start to change that and shift that towards this sense of gratitude, particularly those tasks we don't want to do.
Yeah, I get that. The more you can use "I get to," the more uplifting you're going to be. Because I'm just thinking, there's lots of times where you've got to, like, got to go to the shops. I've got to go to the supermarket.
Yep.
Because I've got to get food.
Yep.
So should I reframe that and say, I have the opportunity to go to the shop. I get to go to the supermarket, because some people don't.
That's exactly right. Look, I think we walk around, particularly in first world countries, we live these lives that are truly very blessed in many, many ways. And it's true. I get to go to the supermarket. There's lots of people that don't have enough money right now to go to the supermarket and buy what they want. There's lots of people who don't have a car or who have to walk to the supermarket. You can get in your car and walk. When we start to bring in more of that, yeah, I get to go to the supermarket. Like it changes your energy around it, and it just reminds you to be a bit more grateful for the things that you do have. And that to me is quite a profound energy shift.
Absolutely, it is. I'm just thinking about lots of things that I do that maybe I think I've got to do, but the reality is I'm blessed that I get to do some of those things.
Yeah. And then when there's things that you don't really want to do or you can't be bothered doing, or, they're just a little bit tedious, but the reality is you get to do all of those. And then you've got the other scenarios, and this is around work performance, around being on a sports field, and perhaps it's, if you're a musician, the expectation of the performance level that you've got to have. So this is then where our expectations come in, and we move it away from what we can control and into things that are outside people's control. So an outcome of let's say a lawn bowls game, because we were playing that this weekend, the outcome of a lawn bowls game, we can do everything right and the opposition can still win.
Absolutely.
Right. And that is not within our control. But what is within our control is how we set up, how we take our time, the way that we approach the game, the attitude that we have. We get to do that. But when our expectations focus purely on outcome and not on what we can control, it creates a sense of anxiety within us, and it creates a lot of pressure. And it's that pressure that then, if we're talking in sport, that pressure can make our muscles just tense a little bit, which actually decreases our performance. So bring it back to, okay, if I want to take that expectation off, if I want to take that pressure off myself, what can I control? And then look at it from, I get to do this. I get to be here and bowl. I get to be here and play whatever the sport is that you're playing, or I get to be at work and try this task. Now, whether or not you nail it the first time, most of the time it doesn't really matter.
It's interesting because as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about it saying, my expectation's up here. So my expectation's here. But if I break it back down to I get to play and go back to the process.
Yes.
And it's just, I get to do this. So I focus on the process and the outcome instead of sorts itself out. Whether it's a win or a loss, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
If you just take it back from that perspective. But if you rock up and go, I've got to win. I've got to win. How many football teams say, I've got to win? We've lost the last 4 weeks. I've got to win.
Yeah.
And that puts so much pressure on the team and individuals.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying to not have goals, right? Because we can have a goal of our aim is definitely to win. Yeah. But when it's this difference between expectation, when we feel that weight of expectation of other people putting pressure on. If you talk about AFL teams, my goodness, you talk about the pressure of all the fans, of whoever, the sponsors. Like, it's huge pressure for those guys. And so what happens is then they don't get to enjoy their game. There's so much expectation, so much pressure on them. But you'll still have a goal to win without a doubt. And
yeah.
it's just, as you said, bring it back to the process of what you're doing.
But if you go in with the attitude, I get to do this,
Mm.
and a lot of people take football as an example. So you get drafted as a young guy,
Mm-hmm.
17, 18 years of age, and you're drafted into this team. You get to play in the system, which is
Yep.
fantastic. But then there's this expectation you've got to perform because you're the number
Yes.
one draft pick. You've got to perform
Yeah.
because if you don't, the media will pull you apart. But if you could emotionally manage that and say, I get to do this. And I think the very best players, like you take in AFL, somebody like Marcus Bontempelli or somebody like
Mm-hmm.
that, he would say, I get to play this.
Yeah.
I'm so lucky.
That's right. And it doesn't mean you don't put the work in. It doesn't mean you're not trying your hardest, all of those things. It just means internally you take the pressure off yourself and you remind yourself of just how lucky you really are to be here doing whatever it is that you're doing. And that then helps just bring a little more gratitude into our life, which for me is one of those most important things in creating more joy in our lives.
Okay, so to summarize that, what would you say?
If I was going to summarize it, I'd just say, look, catch yourself in those times when you say, I've got to, or I have to, or I should, and just change that language to I get to do this, and just see what happens. Like, be really playful with it, and just notice where you're putting pressure on yourself, where you have some expectations of yourself that are really bound to an outcome and a result rather than the process and the enjoyment of what you're doing, and just bring it all back, simplify it back to I get to do this.
Everybody out there that's going to work at the moment, you get to go to work. There's a lot of people that don't.
Yep, that's
So
right.
embrace it and say, wow, this is exciting.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in to Midlife Unfiltered. I hope today sparked something meaningful and reminded you of what's possible in this season of life. If this episode lifted you up, share it with someone who could use the reminder. Subscribing will make sure that you're notified when a new episode is released, and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify also helps more people discover our little corner of midlife truth-telling. You can always reach out through Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. I love hearing from women who are walking this path with me. Interested in working with me? You'll find everything you need at margitcruise.com. And remember, midlife isn't an ending. It's your invitation to feel more alive than ever. See you next week. And now the legal stuff. The content in this podcast is provided for general information and inspiration only. It does not constitute medical, legal, or psychological advice, nor is it a substitute for independent professional care. Margit Cruz is not a registered health professional. You are responsible for your own choices and outcomes and should always seek advice from an appropriately qualified professional.